follow-up.
002 traffic, 260.
Come on, fire!
Lots of the work that WikiLeaks has done, which entails exposures of state criminality, abuse, surveillance, censorship, co-option, criminality at the highest levels. Those are all things which, although readily digestible in newspapers, we thought it would be very interesting to display it in a different way, in the form of an exhibition. All those elements that I mentioned before are various forms of states of violence, or violence that a state can impose on an individual or on a group of people on another state. And it was just a different mechanism and a different vehicle to show the work that WikiLeaks has done.
There is the opportunity to say what can't be said anywhere else. And it's, to me, the most freeing medium to be the bravest you can possibly be. After having a career working with politicians and constantly being, we can't say this now, we should say this in 3 weeks, or if we say this, this then happens, so we shouldn't do it. You have none of those constraints within art or music. People are free to say what they believe. I would say fashion as well. I would actually say Vivienne Westwood, WikiLeaks' biggest supporters. I would say these are the real brave warriors, the musicians, the artists, and the fashion designers.
Hace unos años me di cuenta de que había una persecución bastante grande a mi alrededor, ¿no? Había muchos artistas que estaban teniendo problemas con la justicia simplemente por hacer arte. Habíamos oído historias, siempre se conocían, ¿no? de que si un grupo de anarquistas había sido encarcelado, un grupo de abertzales, sobre todo, de independentistas vascos, gente. Pero no estábamos muy seguros porque las versiones oficiales siempre estaban hablando de que esto se hacía por otra cosa, ¿no? Se hacía por violencia, por cuestiones que no eran puramente políticas, ¿no? Lo cual justificaba la detención. Nos pusimos a investigar y nos encontramos un montón. O sea, ahí hay 24 fotos, cada foto representa un caso en el que a veces hay envuelta una persona y a veces hay envuelto un grupo, una comunidad. O sea, cada cara que ves ahí pincelada representa un grupo de gente mayor. Vimos que sí, que hay un montón. Son casos comprobados de gente que está en la cárcel simplemente por hacer valer sus ideas, sin ningún tipo de violencia, ¿no? Esta situación se está produciendo en todo el mundo, ¿no? Si uno mira presos políticos en Estados Unidos, te encuentras montañas. Si miras en Francia, si miras en Italia. O sea, realmente estamos parados ante una gran mentira, ¿no? La mentira de la democracia, ¿no? Decir que demos, el pueblo y Cracia, el poder, se pueden juntar en una misma palabra, pues es un insulto a la inteligencia, ¿no? Estamos en dictaduras además de carácter fuertemente militar, como es el caso, lo vemos perfectamente en el caso de Assange.
My work that's in the exhibition is a photograph of a mobile force-feeding chair in Camp 6 at Guantanamo Bay. I think I was possibly the first photographer to be allowed to photograph one of these chairs. The chair itself is part of the equipment of state violence. It's part of the furniture, literally, whereby individuals are tied down and force-fed. I was really keen to take part in the exhibition because WikiLeaks kind of made a really important contribution to a different aspect of the work I made about Guantanamo Bay. They released the Camp Delta standard operating procedures, which I was able to access and use as part of a multimedia installation, another representation of the work I made about Guantanamo Bay. So that was a really crucial contribution to the work I made.
I wanted to do a work especially for the exhibition, and something that actually focused directly on Julian Assange, because he's now been in Belmarsh for 4 years, and it just seems to me something very horrific that is happening to him, and of course the repercussions for the idea of freedom of the press And but I didn't want to do a general. I wanted to focus on him. The fact he's in Belmarsh, high security prison. The fact that he's silenced across the media as well. So it's the state is actually perpetrating violence on him, and the media is by being silent. There's a feeling of total close down on reporting about him. And that is a form of violence. It's silencing, you know, making people voiceless. This is what's happening all over the world. The people that are actually fighting against the horrors of the states they're in, silenced. And that's what they're doing to Julian Assange, and that is violence. Silencing in that way is violence.
So I suppose for me, the most poignant piece of art in this collection is by the Institute of Dissent and Datalove, and that is the 66 bound books featuring over 200,000 WikiLeaks cable leaks. And it's a powerful and beautiful thing to see it in itself, but it's also a very poignant thing to know that the very act of holding those books, of reading those cables, is technically a crime under the Espionage Act. And anyone found reading them, found trying to give them to somebody else to read, could technically be found guilty of a crime.
I mean, when I was invited to this exhibition, I thought long and hard about what I might show about such a complex subject as WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. And I decided to avoid direct referencing because the situation that we find ourselves in with Julian Assange and WikiLeaks is symptomatic. And I think that the problem is we need to also see it in a bigger context, that these structures of power are throughout everything that we're doing. You know, the mechanisms of power are right there on your mobile phone all the time. And I think that the WikiLeaks case is a very specific example where that power, the abuse of power, it becomes transparent and we can actually see what's going on. But it's the unseen that is the more dangerous. And I thought that using the mirror invites people to consider looking at their own image, looking at themselves, and think about how they might be complicit in a system without being aware of it. And the glass truncheons is a way for people to also realize that these things are fragile and they can change, they can be disrupted. This is very important that the buttons can be removed from the stand. They're not fixed. They are temporary. They are extremely fragile.
Gran parte de nuestro trabajo gira en torno a ese concepto, ¿no? En torno a la violencia del Estado, a cómo el Estado se organiza o cómo el poder se organiza. Contra un lado está la acción policial y por otro lado viene también, digamos, el refrendo de la justicia, de esa acción, ¿no? Entonces, para nosotros, frente a determinados abusos, frente a determinadas injusticias, digamos que son dos cuestiones complementarias, ¿no? Es decir, también el aparato judicial también manda callar, también es represor. No solamente en nuestro trabajo, que quizás que es muy frontal, ¿no? Estamos tratando, es una crítica a la policía, tiene que ver también con nuestras posturas antiautoritarias, pero en el resto de la exposición lo podemos ver, yo creo que también el trabajo de Regina, ¿no? Esta idea de intentar enumerar, contar el genocidio y siendo anestesiada al mismo tiempo, ¿no? Tiene que ver, ¿no? con esa idea del Estado, de controlar todo, de controlar la disidencia. Bueno, yo creo que se refleja en todas las obras, ¿no?
The thing that struck me the most of one of the items in this exhibition is the collateral murder video that has been placed together with a coat of arms and has blood in it. Now, the collateral murder video is an extremely upsetting video, and it's counterintuitive in that the more you watch it, the more upsetting that violence becomes. I've watched it regularly for close to 13 years now, and it doesn't get easier. And that particular installation, or bear in mind that that video is actually in black and white, that particular installation that has bright red blood going through it makes it even more powerful and even more grotesque and even more inhumane as to what actually went on in it. And so those are important. People oftentimes need visual stimulants to understand severity and gravity.
То есть эта работа, символ, английский символ justice, он как бы заполнен кровью людей из Ирака, которые пострадали от войны, которые пострадали вот от такой чудовищной войны, ну, когда Буш и Тони Блэр решили как бы обманом захватить страну. Ну, я попросил как бы людей быть частью этого произведения искусства, то есть это кровь людей, пострадавших от войны, иракцев, которая циркулирует в этом символе. Люди за эту войну не наказаны, они как бы до сих пор герои. Человек, который хотел остановить войну и рассказывать, что реальность войны, он сидит в тюрьме. То есть мы понимаем очень четко сейчас, как устроен мир. То есть получается, что власть, она не может существовать без насилия, без крови людей, участвующих, или как бы жертв конфликта. Миру нужна война, нужен бизнес, надо продавать оружие, и люди, которые мешают войне, они как бы должны быть в тюрьме.
It's been an extremely unusual legal case in basically every way, and the mainstream media have ignored all the different corruptions of process, the conflicts of interest, the irregularities, but Declassified has covered them extensively, so this is a way of showing that work in a public form. So it goes from the political side, from Sir Alan Duncan, who was the UK Minister for the Americas from 2016 to 19. He was the key UK government official in the campaign to get Assange out of the Ecuadorian embassy and get the Ecuadorians to cancel his asylum. He's connected to the judge that actually green-lighted Assange's extradition to the US in 2021. They're good friends going back 40 years. It goes into the US government's connections to these UK establishment figures, from the CIA to the American Enterprise Institute to the Henry Jackson Society. From a journalistic perspective, getting any information about this case has been basically impossible. And that is because they are overseeing a cover-up. So the way that they do it is that there's not really a propaganda war against Assange anymore. What the program is of the state powers is to just try and bury the issue. They don't want it talked about. They don't want anyone talking about it. And they've been quite successful in that, but we need to break that silence. I also think that, as you can see from all the exhibitors, that these issues are ones that do exercise artists, because they're fundamental issues about freedom, creative freedom, about freedom of speech, all issues that are integral to art and artist practice. So it's important to bring in people who are going to be affected by this case, whether they like it or not. That's what most people don't understand. This isn't a case that ends with Assange. This is a Rubicon that is being crossed in the Western world.
The release of the cables shows the importance of making secret information available, but in doing so, it provides material which can be used by artists, by journalists, by investigators to develop their work. So, I mean, in terms of visual art practice, having access to that kind of information is really, really important for people who want to make work that is about freedom of the press, freedom of expression, and is about trying to hold our governments to account for what they were doing at a time when we were being told that a lot of the actions that were being taken in our name were about defending what they phrase as our so-called values and our so-called freedoms, yet the way in which that was done was clearly through acts which were themselves illegal and themselves undermine the very things they say they were trying to protect.
The paper, which had other copies of the Snowden files overseas, agreed to take an angle grinder to the computer while the intelligence agents watched.
¿Quién está dictando aquí la ley, lo que está bien, lo que está mal? ¿Quién debe ir a la cárcel y quién no? Pues en muchos casos lo está dictando simplemente el poder militar en curso, ¿no? Vemos aquí a un señor que lo que ha estado es contándonos lo que nadie se atrevía a contar, que nos ha estado revelando lo que se cuece dentro, lo que se cuece en los sucios intestinos del poder, y la reacción social ha sido brutal. Este señor se le ha estado aplicando todo el sadismo institucional. Hace unos años hicimos una pieza, Jens Hanning y yo, en Dinamarca, que la llamamos la Declaración de Copenhague. Eran unas letras enormes que decían "I'm tired of this global sadistic regime", ¿no? Porque creo que es lo que tenemos, ¿no? Un régimen sádico global que nos tiene a todos bastante acojonados, que no sabemos hasta qué punto se puede hablar o no se puede hablar sin herir las sensibilidades del militarismo y de los grandes símbolos caducos de un Occidente que está en caída libre. Y bueno, pues exposiciones como esta nos dan oportunidad de alzar la voz, de levantar el puño y de pedir la libertad de todos los presos políticos y sobre todo que se vayan al carajo todos los que mandan, todos los jueces, toda la gente que tiene la poca vergüenza de encarcelar a periodistas, de encarcelar a músicos, de encarcelar a artistas. Que pare ya esto de una puta vez y que esta exposición sirva para que cada vez seamos más los que nos demos cuenta que este régimen sádico tiene que acabar.
I think in the world we're in now, I think art has become, in a sense, it's more and more important because it's one of the places where you get non-corporate response to what's going on in the world. And so it's not just work that actually engages with politics. That I think actually making art itself has become a sort of gesture of freedom. We've got to get more and more people involved, which I think is, I mean, it's happening now all over the world. There are people who are supporting him, and that I think is totally vital. And doing art about it is one fragment of a whole world of protest.
The imprisonment of Julian Assange is an attempt to silence him. But it's not only an attempt to silence him, it's an attempt to silence all the publishers who come after him, all the sources who want to expose state criminality or states of violence, if you like, all the journalists who want to write about it. It is an attempt to send a very strong message to the public that if this is what you do, this is what will happen to you. But it won't work. Subsequent to Julian being imprisoned, other people have come forward, other publications have been done. There have been other people that have been prosecuted and persecuted in a similar manner purely for having done the job of journalism in a dignified manner, reporting the truth, reporting the abhorrent nature of the truth and the appalling crimes that various governments or individuals or corporations have done.
With its first detection, dated in 2015, the malware Pegasus, made by the Israeli cyber surveillance company NSO Group, has been used by governments worldwide to infect the phones of activists, journalists, and human rights defenders.
People don't realize that this is the single most important media freedom case of our time, and it affects everybody in the world. Although Julian is the person who's being persecuted, and although Julian is the person who's locked up for having done nothing more than publish the truth, the result, if he is extradited, and if the United States government is successful in prosecuting him for exposing these truths, will be that no individual anywhere in the world will be free to expose the truth of another state that some state might find unappealing. It will set a precedent, not only in the United States, not only will it change the interpretation of the Official Secrets Act in the United Kingdom, but it will also set a precedent all over the world. By imprisoning Julian for the stuff that he has published is the modern-day equivalent of burning books. It's a different form and attempt to censor and to delete the past.